I'm just gonna pause the recording and I start it back up again. So how are you guys tonight?
Not bad.
Not bad?
Good.
Good. Thank you to everyone that came to town meeting last night. I know a few of you were there.
Not a lot of people. It's kind of thin.
It was.
Yeah, I don't know what the final count was. I was in the back, so I was trying to count.
Well, the one that we had to count when it was like 69-29.
I know.
Barely over 100 people. there.
Yeah. I think last year was similar too. Or as I recall at the Galvin. Hi, Jim.
How's it going?
How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Matt, nice to meet you virtually.
And
Oh
you,
yeah, welcome. Yeah, everyone welcome, Matt. Sorry, Matt, I forgot you haven't been here.
Yeah, had some business travel, but I'm back for a little bit, so glad to be able to join.
Good. I think we're just waiting for Robin.
Yes.
We can give her another minute and then we can call the meeting to order. I'll pull up the agenda while we're waiting. Can you guys all see my screen? Yeah. Oh. We can give her another, or we could get started, and then if she joins, does that work for everyone?
Yeah, I think it's 7:01. I think that we
Yeah.
should convene the call to order. And if
Okay.
Robin joins, then we can just denote that she arrived a little bit later than the balance of the group.
Okay, that works for me. So Jim, I'll let you lead this off since I'm more the internal person.
Yep. So one, thank you all for taking the time yet again to attend. Whoever's Chris, can you please mute? And Aaron, maybe if you make me a co-host as well. But so thank you all for taking the time. I think the object of this meeting is to review some initial mapping that Aaron and our third-party consultant Ezra, who's unfortunately unable to attend, he has graduation, have done, and to provide feedback as it relates to the districts that have been identified for the purposes of compliance with the Section 3A, as well as the intent is to discuss a couple of the next steps from how do we go from where we are now to an actual proposed map, and then start discussing some of the other items that we're going to need to iron out as we go through the balance of this effort. So prior to that, we have meeting minutes from April 4th, 2023 and April 18th, 2023. I don't know if other folks have had a chance to review said meeting minutes and if they have any comments on it before we hear and entertain a motion to accept.
My only comment was that I was surprised they weren't on the town format for meeting minutes, but its content was fine.
Anyone have any other?
Sorry, in what way, Robin?
So for the environmental committee, we were given a Word file to use that just looks different a little bit.
Okay. I can go
So-
back and take a look. I kind of pulled this from what I've seen on the town council. It might not be exactly, but I typically don't take minutes. I'm not a clerk. I don't know if anyone else has concerns for the sake of formatting.
It's not a big deal. I just happen to notice it.
Okay. I don't know if anyone else has concerns.
Does anyone have any comments as it relates to the substance of the meeting minutes?
I guess
for me.
I guess the only thing I didn't see that when we were looking at the maps last time, we did talk about, do we want to think of anything that's beyond, immediate to the commuter rail, thinking of over near Audubon and the Linfield line, and I didn't see any reference to like that as a.
I think that's in
something.
there.
Yeah,
Is it
I
there?
included it. It's probably the, yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's right here. Sorry, I forgot you can see my screen. The working group also discussed how we look at other parts of town for multifamily development, specifically areas that has already
Oh,
occurred.
there it is.
Elm Street and potential multifamily zoning there separate from MBTA communities.
Okay. That's fine. Then.
Anyone else have any comments on the substance? Seeing no other action, can I hear or entertain a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second.
Second, thank you, Greg, for being so quick to the gun. In that case, roll call vote. Matt Brown,
I think he has to abstain from this because he wasn't there, right? Is that correct?
Nope, you don't
No.
have to abstain if you aren't there. You can still vote.
Or you can choose to abstain. It's up to you.
Yeah.
I'll
I think
sorry,
he
you just
froze.
froze. What was that?
I'm gonna abstain since I wasn't there.
Yeah, I agree. Aaron,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Greg,
Yes.
Julie,
Yes.
and Robin.
Yes.
So 6-0 to accept the meeting minutes from April 18th, 2023. And then Aaron, you want to pull up the April, any comments as it relates to the meeting minutes for April 4th, 2023?
No comments.
In that case, can I hear a motion to accept?
So moved.
Can I hear a second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Matt,
Abstain.
Aaron,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Greg,
Yes.
Julie,
Yes.
and Robin.
Yes.
Okay, 6-0 vote. Thank you very much for that. So the meeting minutes are accepted as noted. So Aaron, do we want to start rolling into that presentation that you provided?
Yep.
I think I'll just kind of start with the headline. Aaron's got a lot of really great backup in terms of the back and forth that her and Ezra have been going on. But so right now we've talked about in terms of compliance with the actual requirements from the state of having an overlay district sited around the Wakefield Junction commuter rail stop, as well as the Greenwood commuter rail stop. After doing a decent amount of modeling, there's a possibility to utilize both, but the Greenwood presents some serious challenges. And the reason being is that the way that the law is written, you have to take the lots as is. And so the lots around Greenwood, if you utilize the 3 units per lot that we had discussed and we felt comfortable with it from a density perspective, the lots are big enough as is that you don't reach the minimum thresholds in terms of the density that the state is setting out. So in some respects, it doesn't help you unless you were to take the lots around Greenwood and you were to increase the maximum or the allowable lots on those as of right to 5 or 6, somewhere in that range. So I think unless other people disagree, my understanding is that that's something that this board was not particularly interested in terms of that going up to that height. The good news is, as we started doing the modeling around, and Aaron, can you pull up the districts around Wakefield Junction? But the good news is that as we started to model around Wakefield Junction, the 3 districts that are identified on this map right here can meet the standard by themselves. And there's a bunch of backup in here that we can get into. But I did want to take a step back. These lots envision a maximum of 4 units per lot per the conversations that we had previously. We could theoretically get to a compliant state with just this, some sort of district along this shape. And then we could add the Greenwood if we so chose, but it would not be the basis of the compliance with the state, if that makes sense for the group. I don't know if what I just ran through with everyone makes sense, or if anyone had any additional questions they wanted to know, or if Aaron, you had any other color you wanted to add to that kind of overall headline takeaway.
Yeah, just for the headline, I do have a lot of backup information here, which might be good to start the conversation of where people want to go. I put this together based on the conversation Ezra and myself have had, and Jim came in to from our last meeting that we had, talking, like Jim just said, about Greenwood and the Wakefield station. And we've talked about this before. This is all based on a compliance model that the state has put together. And you all know that we have certain standards that we have to meet, the number of units we have to create, the acreage, how much of that percent needs to be around a transit area. So all those things come into play when we get these calculations, which I will show you. And Jim, I don't know if you want me going into that detail now, and then we can open up the discussion from there, just so everyone can kind of see the background information of why we're kind of gearing more towards this way. But again, we can play around with it more. That's what these meetings are for.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah,
want
Aaron,
me?
can we just go just with a little bit of pace? We can go through kind of the how we got to that top line takeaway, and then after that we can circle back if folks have questions as it relates to some of this
Yeah.
backup information.
So we talked about last meeting. This is the compliance model that Ezra and I put together based on using GIS. So you see here, this is Wakefield Station. We have a District 1 here that we include, District 2, District 3. As you'll see, we're kind of mindful of not including these lots that are along commercial corridors here, as well as the Foundry area. We discussed those in past meetings, as well as the large park, Moulton Park here, which would take away from, it wouldn't count anyways, but it may or may not help us. So we're going to play around with that a little more. So that's why it's separated into 3 districts, because they're not right next to each other, adjacent to each other, but we believe this could still fit what the state is looking for. So we plugged in all these different lots, pulled the information from GIS and plugged it into the compliance model. And as you'll see here, here's District 1, which was this red here. Then we had District 2, which was the gray. Then we had District 3, which was the orange yellow. And so we inputted this information with a minimum lot size of 4,000, open space, they're all the same, 30%, parking spaces per dwelling unit. This is all information that we input. 3.5, building height was 3 based on the conversation that we had at the last meeting. Maximum lot coverage, which stays kind of true to the general residence that we have in town, 35%. And then we put in the lot area per dwelling unit as 1,000 across the board for each district. So every district is the same. So it pulls up, it's just a lot to take in, so we can come back to it, but I just wanted to give you an overview. District 1, which again was kind of that northern area in the red right here. If you take away some of the public area, right-of-ways, all that, it gets us about 430 units for that district. District 2 is kind of that Richardson, a little north of the Galvin, south of Albion, gives us 231 units. And then District 3 is that kind of west of the train tracks, gives us 1,097 units, which brings us to 1,758, which is over our 1,696 that we need to meet, which is great. So then that plugs in all this information. And then the big thing is the dwelling units per acre, which, as you can recall, is a minimum of 15. So District 1 has 13.4, District 2 had 17.8, and District 3 had 17.1. So the average of the 3 districts is 16.1, so over that 15. And as you recall, it just needs to be an average of those districts with what's in that area. And so it has all these it highlights the non-conforming parcels. So you see there's 4 in this, 2, 17, the excluded area, open space. So I can go into more detail about this area later. So if you see that, we're at 16.1. So we could turn that in today, hopefully. The only concern we have is that those districts all don't touch each other, but it's broken up by the commuter rail. And Ezra thinks we had a conversation with DHCD and explained our situation about not wanting to really include our commercial areas. We have a good story to tell. And I'm sorry, this is just a repeat of I'm sorry. This is kind of the guidelines. It highlights a little more. You see here, this is what all the things we have to meet. This is what we're getting from the model at Wakefield Station. So we're way above what we need to be, which is great. If we look at Greenwood real quick, and this is a map that I worked, I'm sorry about that, with Katie Lafferty, who's our GIS analyst in town. I was able to plug in some of these numbers, and again, this included that Myrtle, Miriam, Fenwick area. You'll see here some of these side streets. I kind of stayed away from this area because we did talk about staying off Main Street again. We should have maybe plugged in more of these streets over here, which we can do. But going back to what Jim was saying, our big concern is these lots are a lot larger than they are at the Wakefield station. So we'd have to go up in density to make those density units per acre. But if you look
Hey,
at these,
Aaron, can we just take a pause for a second? For the Greenwood models that you're showing on the screen, this is all based on 3 units per lot.
Yes.
Similar to the conversation we had previously. And
Yes,
really the takeaway is that if you have that, we can play around with some of these other lots in there, but in general, the lots are big enough that it drives your minimum or your density down such that unless we're gonna commit to, as we're just shooting from the hip thought, 4 or 5 units per lot would have where you have to be in order to hit
Yeah,
the density targets.
and Ezra and I talked about that. It probably have to be more 5, 6 units to make it work, but he played around with it a little bit. We're going to play around with it a little more based on our conversation today if people still want to head in that direction. But that's a bigger conversation we can have tonight. So this is all based on the same things that you're seeing here: 4,000, 30%, 1.5 parking spaces, building height 3. And so this is what you get, 11.8.
So I want to just take a second and pause. I know Aaron just threw a lot of numbers at people. There's a lot of information that we just ran over. I do want to pause and just give other members of the working group the chance. Is there anything that doesn't make sense as we're talking about this? Is there anything that people want to have a little bit further information as it relates to something that may or may not make sense from what we just reviewed?
Jim, I just have a question on the I guess the per lot calculations. It is per actual lot, right? Or it's not like, average size. So there's no calculation that needs to be done. If it's a bigger lot, it doesn't, or a small lot, it doesn't matter. It's just lots as they exist today.
That is correct. And
Okay,
so
interesting. Yeah.
Aaron, can we go back to the compliance, the model for by Wakefield Junction? So just to kind of peek behind the curtain a little bit, at one point, Aaron, Ezra, and I were looking at the model, and we were, we included. No, sorry. Aaron, can I just take the screen for a second, by chance?
Sure.
Easier. So, so basically, we were playing around with the actual lots that were included within different districts. And one of the things, can folks see my screen? So one of the things that we did is that we figured that, at one point, this area right here on the screen was included, where the foundry area was, and it completely murdered our density because all those lots as is, it was basically saying, okay, it's the same thing as if Grayson Loss was a 3-unit as of right apartment, as of right multifamily building. Well, Grayson Loss is so big in terms of the lot area that your density went way down. So strategically, we excluded that lot because it wasn't helpful to the cause. I think fundamentally our constraint is production of units, not land area. Our minimum land area by the state in terms of the actual, what they're dictating is like 36 acres. So theoretically, we could have a 36-acre plot with a super high density, but that's not realistic for our community. So at a lower density, that's how you get this. This is about like that 110-ish that we had talked about previously. I don't know. Does that answer your question, or is there?
Yeah, no,
yeah, okay.
No, clear.
But couldn't you overcome that by then designated certain parcels to have a higher density?
You
Instead
could.
of having a blanket 3 units per lot?
Yeah, you could do that. And we talked about that a little. Like you could create District 2, for example, allowing that to be 6 units.
Right.
Yeah. So if we go back to the Greenwood section, for example, if we were really motivated to utilize this section for compliance, the station is currently like right around here. So you could theoretically make all of these, like 8 or 10 units as of right, and then have everything else be 3 units, and you know, have it staggered, and that would be a potential pathway to compliance. You know, I don't know if I necessarily advocate for that, because I feel like that would probably be a little harder to justify in terms of that level of density, you know, as of right, with no special permits. But if other people in the group disagree, I think that's something, a conversation we can have.
And something Ezra and I were speaking about too, is this, we talked about this too, this doesn't need to be the end of the conversation, right? Of looking at different, creating multifamily zoning. What we're just trying to do is be, of course, you know, this group is to create more housing, or this law is to create more housing, but we really just have to meet these certain standards. So we could, you know, just look at Wakefield Station, send it in and say, we've hit, you know, all the targets that we need to hit, but then still look at these other districts as other, like we were talking about, multifamily zones, and have different, you know, requirements and dimensional requirements for that. So there's a
so-
lot of different routes that we could go.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about that may or may not be of interest to the group is, say we passed a multifamily zoning district where it was as of right, and you had Wakefield Junction, Greenwood, and a couple of other locations that were discussed at the last working group meeting, you know, up around Salem Street and up by 95. You could theoretically pass that in one piece of one overlay, and then just take the Wakefield Junction section and submit just that section to the state to demonstrate compliance. And they would kind of ignore the balance of your overlay district from a compliance perspective. So I think that,
But
what
I would
that
just be
tells-
mindful of that. Sorry, Jim, I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to wear the hat on the other side. That might scare a lot of people too, and then this MBTA communities wouldn't pass. So something to think about. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just putting that out there too. I don't know if anyone has anything else to say.
Yeah, so I guess that's the fundamental question then, right? Is if we just want to initially only comply with the MBTA communities initiative or act, I guess, or think of this as a whole. You know, basically, is there an appetite? Do you think it would appease or hurt to say, hey, look, yeah, we're right here meets the requirement, but we're thinking of this not in a vacuum of this law. We're thinking of it as a future of this town. And also, I think it was Matt who pointed out last meeting, or maybe even the first meeting, to not spread the equity, but to, you know, think of this as a townwide project, not as a burden here. I guess I don't know what the appetite from sort of an electorate would be, or much less what this group, what our fundamental belief or approach should be.
I still think we should look at the, you know, the fairness of spreading this out a little bit. Going on to sell this, I think there'll be a lot of people in town that would want just to do the bare minimum and just squeak under and leave it at that. I think if, you know, it's hard to tell who's going to show up, to tell you the truth. Like last night, you could have seemed like pass anything up there and nobody would have really said anything, unfortunately. Not that I want to sneak anything in on anybody, but I do want to look at this as a way to kind of get a little more extra housing in town. Sell it as some of these extra units could be used for downsizing purposes for elderly people, things like that. So I still want to see it spread out a little bit towards Greenwood. We haven't an entire stop there. I think we should get something in there. It may not meet minimums, but I think to be fair to the town and to the people up there that are going to be affected, we should spread it out some down. So.
And I agree with that. I'm just thinking it's the way we package it. It's more that than anything else. It's not this overall big package where the MBTA communities is just this one part of it. It's MBTA communities stands alone. And then we could also have other articles saying we want to create these multifamily zoning districts that we have other things that we can get more creative with, that we don't need to comply with the whole MBTA. So something to think about.
I just get worried about taking too many bites at the apple. I think that if you're going and you're passing a multifamily overlay district, you should just pass the multifamily overlay district. And if you pass like an MBTA community specific one, and then you have a separate one, then I think that raises questions of why are you taking multiple bites and multiple districts and making it more confusing? That'd be my personal read, and I basically would check off on everything that Matt just said.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's gonna get too confusing to carve out certain things. Like, let's talk about this holistically and the real reason we're doing this. You know, yes, some of it's compliance, but in the end, it's about housing for different populations in town. And more housing.
And I think that if we're thoughtful about where we want to cite this, I mean, it's even beyond the fact that we've got this, the state is making this a requirement. I think it's also just, good policy. And I think we've consistently taken the lead from other communities in terms of leadership on this issue. I mean, Aaron can speak to what other people keep saying to you, but I think us trying to be proactive and be a little more thoughtful than just like, let's skate under the bare minimum. I would advocate for something like that if other folks on this committee have that appetite. And frankly, if we come up with something and then we hear a bunch of feedback from the town that there's not an appetite for it, if this goes to Springtown meeting and fails, we have Fall Town meeting that we could theoretically strip everything else out and then have a second opportunity to pass, a bare minimum if that is where the townsfolk end up being from their perspective.
And town meeting will not be the first time people see this. We're gonna be out publicly talking about this.
Julie, I'm glad you said that, because that's actually what I'm worried about is
Yeah.
us going too far without more feedback from others to get that weather balloon. Because I'm not sure this group is fully representative of all the voices. I think we all have an interest in promoting more affordable housing, but we know that that's not everyone. I just don't know if it's a minority or majority. So I feel like we kind of need some feedback on if we present more, what's the reaction. That's not the same as the voters, because we never know who shows up, but what's going to be said around town.
Well, we can set this up as an option for, the trial balloon and see how it goes. And then know that we can scale it back to a certain degree that is going to work. So I think we should set this up as an option. And I think we just need to see how the initial reaction is. If there's enough people that kind of agree that there needs to be a little diversity in housing, especially around these areas.
I would agree, Matt. I think it's way easier to remove than to add at the end, so.
Yeah.
And then if we take a step back, I think Robin's point about the interaction with the public is a very good one. I think that just as a reminder to folks, I think the intent of this group is to come up with what we're calling the initial proposal. And then, if we have this completed, our task is completed by August. From August until Springtown meeting, that would be the opportunity to present to the public. There's going to be a series of open meetings that the public will have the ability to have the feedback on at the planning board. Honestly, still trying to figure out exactly the best way to outreach people on zoning. That's something that is a separate conversation. And if other people have ideas, I'd be super open to it, because I've been trying to struggle in terms of what's the best way to actually give an elevator pitch on this whole without falling into a rabbit hole and having people's eyes glaze over. It's something that we're really struggling with in terms of kind of thinking about what that communication strategy wants to be.
So can we go back a little bit and go back to initially kind of this Wakefield station? And then it sounds like people want us to look more into the Greenwood station, where it won't get rid of our average. Do you want to like what
So-
that looks like.
So do we really even need to, I guess, look more into Greenwood from the MBTA? Like, we understand, or I think we understand that it's not going to add value to compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. I think what we sort of, at least what I was hearing was, understand we sort of move forward with this area and for the MBTA Communities Act, but also look to the other areas in town simply from the whole, future of housing in the town. So we could look more into those other areas, but not necessarily, you'll almost think of them as, this is, the priority, and the others are not priority, but, this is what we need, and the other ones are what we should have or what we want to have. So I don't know if we need to necessarily look more into Greenwood from this, but think more about it and how we want to actually. Luckily, we don't have to fit it into the MBTA Communities Act, and we can think more, holistically about it. That's what I was hearing, at least.
So by adding in Greenwood, are we subtracting from this, or are we just not meeting?
Our average gets brought down from that 16.1 dwelling units per acre. I had a slide about that.
Okay, so it does go down, okay.
Yeah, to 13.65 or something like that.
But would it go up if we included some other parcels around Foundry by changing its density by right? Can you swap the two? Or work with them in combination, one go higher, one go lower to average?
From
No.
my understanding, we wanted to try to stay away from Foundry due to the kind of mixed use component. But I might be wrong. I thought that.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, so I think this right here kind of shows a good average of, if you just take the study that Aaron and Ezra did, the district that we showed around Wakefield Junction at 16.1, Greenwood's at 11.8, so you're at basically 14, and that is in non-compliance with the statute or the Section 3A requirements.
I mean, we could also look into this. Sorry, you can't see my mouse. We could also look into that northwest or northeast area of the map that Jim has now on the other side of Main Street. It's still within that half mile. Jim, do you mind? Nope, northeast. Sorry, that would be north on the other side of the lake. I don't know where your mouse is. Right here. Ezra and I also talked about that to include some districts of that, include some of those lots as well, which could bring up probably our dwelling units per acre for this area, where maybe the average would be closer to 15 for Greenwood if you wanted to keep it in, or if not. And then we included some of those other side streets that I didn't have on that map for Greenwood area. It could potentially get that average of 15, but I don't know at this current moment.
I guess that's my question. We know, or at least it seems like as a group, we want to think about Greenwood, but do we need to even include it? Like I think you said earlier, Aaron, we could do these other areas over by Audubon down in Greenwood and not submit them to the MBTA community, so they don't end up to the DHCD, so they don't end up taking down the average here. So we can almost do what we think is better in those areas, whereas here we're using this just to purely meet.
Exactly.
Not purely, that's not the right way, but we're using this to meet the requirements, whereas we're thinking more and doing what we think is actually right for the other areas and not including in here, and not kind of mixing and matching and saying use this area because we're going to include it all. Well, those, that brings down the average. We can separate it out and make it work, as a whole, rather than just, well, we're going to submit this one group to DHCD.
Correct.
Because I
Yeah,
think we're all in agreement that we want to look at those other areas, but I don't know if we want to look at those other areas
that's part of this.
as part of this. And then have to mix and match just to kind of,
Because to make those other areas work, if you included it, you'd have to start doing things like increasing the density around here. Whereas you could just have a compliance based on these 3 districts, submit that to the state, and then we could do like any other overlay. We could do whatever we want as a community in order to be thoughtful about those other locations. And I think, Greg, I think you're spot on, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
it just seems to allow us more flexibility for the town to do what it wants and thinks is best for those areas, rather than include them in one and have to mix and match to meet, to go over the amount in required land area, but just barely meet it in units. Or units per acre, whatever, what is it, units per lot or whatever.
Yeah, so while we're trying to be equitable, I don't think we should punish a certain district just to do that. So, yeah, I agree. We should try to work with this as our submittal area, but overall, we'll look at the town and equity and spreading it out a little bit.
So if we just take a step back, right? If I'm hearing that there's a soft consensus around potentially, using this as the basis to get to, our actual compliance, are the districts that are drawn on the screen conceptually where people think we want to be? And the other thing I would also kind of have people think about is from a practical perspective, right? I don't think that we necessarily want to have a district that is as lot specific as this is. You know what I mean? I think we want to have something that's a little more rational in terms of relationships to streets. So I think things that we should think about, I think what probably makes sense is to have some sort of offset from commercial streets, 50 feet, 100 feet, something to that effect. And then some language in the bylaw basically saying that if your lot's not 100% in the district, you have no right, it doesn't help you in any manner. That way you could pretty easily exclude all your commercial corridors. If you exclude 100 feet of the frontage and you have to be 100% in the district, we could do that. But for example, if I'm looking at like a parcel like this, we probably don't, when we get to wherever the final is going to be, we probably don't want like a single parcel. We probably want to either exclude that or extend it to, a street that makes a little more sense. So I just want to take a step back. If we're looking at this specific district, are there other observations that people are making, so we can provide some quality feedback to Aaron and Ezra as it relates to, how we should be thinking about some of these areas?
I would like to see something east of Main Street. If we're going to have, density, we want these people basically walking through downtown. And I'd rather pull back District 3 and focus the concentration of people around the actual business area where we want people to end up. So east of Main Street up in there, I think that would be maybe from Vernon up towards Maine. I think that was an area that we should look at and scale back the stuff around Walton Playground.
I would totally agree with Matt. One question I have, and maybe we don't have an answer yet though, is, and it might be more of Ezra's area. As we end up having separate or districts that are separated like this, are we does that affect us in any way? I know there was some discussion about, it has to be, there was a certain percentage that had to be within each district or something. I don't remember specifically what Ezra was talking about. Maybe that doesn't matter if it's all this close to but yeah, there was something Ezra was mentioning.
So yeah, Ezra and I were talking about that the other day. So you were right. The areas of where like District 1 and District 3, District 2, I think they wanted those districts to or at least 2 of them to be touching. So it creates that within the certain area. But Ezra was saying, so the state just came out the other day saying that they will have meetings with towns. You have to inquire. The meeting, so you can show them what you're thinking and they can provide feedback. So we were going to meet with them
Okay.
and talk to them about why the logic behind why we're doing that is to be mindful of our commercial areas. And so Ezra doesn't think it would be a problem based on talking to other consultants as well, but it's definitely something that we want to figure out sooner than later. And so I don't foresee it being an issue, but something we've definitely are going to look into and something I'm going to reach out to DHCD about. But I think just like one of the districts would have to be touching another.
So I think what I'm hearing is, at least from Matt and Greg, an interest in kind of this area highlighted on the screen. I'd be interested in hearing, Julie, Robin, Matt, what some of your feedback would be in terms of, if you think that's something that you would be supportive of, or if there's some other take that you may have as it relates to that concept.
Well, I wouldn't have any problem creating a district over there if doing so would sort of take some of the pressure off being able to include some of the Greenwood areas and not bringing the densities down below where we need them.
So I think, Matt, if we were talking about just trying to make this zone compliant by itself, I think anything that we'd be doing with Greenwood would not, we could just do whatever we think is in the best interest of the town, and then have Greenwood, basically stand on its own, but it would not be submitted to the state for compliance.
I apologize, stepped away to deal with the little kid for a second there.
No worries. So if that's
yes,
the case, then
standalone compliance, it's so sort of same story for me. If we can achieve standalone compliance by including this additional area in the Northeast, then I think that makes sense.
And if you had to step away, so just kind of to level set, so the three districts that are shown on the screen right now, we think can basically comply by themselves. You'd be right at the minimum, but we could theoretically, if we so chose as a community, include other areas that would not be submitted to the state. And so we could do whatever we wanted around Greenwood without any restrictions from the state, if we could get these three districts or some variation thereof to comply by themselves. Matt's initial comment was, in lieu of having the district extend as far as it does on the west over by the Moulton Playground, he was interested, and Greg McIntosh indicated some level of agreement of adding something on the eastern side of Main Street in order to have some density on both sides of our main commercial hub.
Understood. And thanks for filling me in on that piece. That's the piece that I didn't have about that southeastern portion being taken away from District 2. So yes, I think that makes sense, and having some exposure on both sides of the main commercial area makes sense as well.
I like balancing on the, within the circle. I guess where exactly on the eastern side seems arbitrary unless there's some logic. I don't know how I would pick where amongst the eastern edge to do it, so I feel like we'd need to have a logic on why that corner than further south or something,
Yeah,
I would argue that would be a good district because you're actually closer to the bus, which for a lot of people is more convenient and more economical than the train. So to me, you're getting people towards downtown, and there is an option over there. Again, as long as the bus keeps running, who knows? I think to justify it as a justification, there is a transit option over there, which enhances, it gives you an option. Take the bus or the train. To walk a little bit further to the train, but the bus is closer.
can you just orient me that, is that like Salem and Maine where the corner is?
Well, the bottom left corner of it isn't that where Brightview is, so that's.
Yeah, so that's Brightview. I guess my argument is I think I'd like it a little further south because I think of walking distance in town, right? And I completely agree that something on this side of Main Street makes so much sense because we want to move people around. But I would see walking distance to farmland, to Shaw's. I would try to think about what amenities are in town, not just kind of how you get in and out of town.
Julie, is that kind of where I'm showing right now? Is that kind of an accurate representation?
Yeah, is that like the Lincoln parking lot kind of? Like, where's the bus stop in front of farmland?
Farmland would be, let me see.
It would
Sorry,
be-
I have a side thing where I'm looking at Google Maps.
Well, so the bottom
Yeah.
left-hand corner,
Down by
that's
the
the
It's
Right.
just
parking
to the
lot.
left, yeah, the bottom left.
Yeah, so
yeah.
that's kind of so I'm kind of thinking up in there, right? Like, is that Crescent
That's
Street?
farmland.
This is Crescent Street.
So this is like
Yeah.
farmland, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of where I'm thinking. I'm thinking, we're doing the Envision project. It's gonna go down to Shaw's. There's baseball fields down there. There's a new cafe going in down there. I guess I would love to figure out how everybody can kind of get around on bike or walking and get some basic amenities within, half a mile or something.
So does part of that though, down there is more commercial and we want to try to stay away from the commercial because this is multifamily by right. And already being some of the bigger lots, there is Shaw's, there is the warehouse, you probably won't pick up. This is spitballing, I have no idea, but
Yeah.
seemingly you wouldn't pick up enough to really for it to.
I
to
think
matter.
that area, Greg, is more residential. I mean, as you get close to Water Street, the
Yeah,
bottom
yeah,
there.
it depends on
definitely
how
can-
far you extend
Yeah.
it, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you want to do the whole area there? I mean, I know we have the Public
Yeah.
Works building, Brightview. I mean, why wouldn't you want to include kind of that?
Yeah, I would do it bigger.
Yeah,
Instead
So
of
like
whole thing.
area.
Crescent,
yeah, like I would do all of Crescent. Kind of back up over by the Lincoln School. Is that the Lincoln up there? The
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Otis.
Yeah, we have Eaton.
Yep. Bryant.
So something kind of
Yeah,
like that. I don't know if that's kind of what you're talking about, Julie.
That's kind
Something-
of what I'm thinking. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I love the idea of moving people around and having them be able to get on public transportation as well as enjoy what we have here in town, restaurants and whatnot.
And isn't this kind of generally touching or close to where the rail trail is eventually going to be running through
Yeah.
as well?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
that's a
see it
great
right
point.
there. You
Yep.
see
your
it.
hand is on the
Yeah.
entry. Yeah.
Right here. I think from my perspective, I think that Matt's point in terms of this area up here is a good one, but I don't necessarily view it as an either or. I think that kind of this whole general block of area in town, if I'm thinking about it right, something like that to me would seem to make a lot of sense, especially if we're talking about potentially peeling off some of this area over here. You have this giant hill, which I don't know if we want to have the in the northwest corner, but I also love the idea of having this area on the north along the train tracks continue. I think Matt had mentioned that as a spot that was pretty ripe, especially considering that you have good access to the town, the lake, and all those amenities. So I think that if I'm looking at this, I think that if we added something on the east side of town, somewhere in this Crescent area, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And then the question just becomes, what do we want to do with the balance of District 3? If we want to peel it back, or if we want to, set a new zone, for lack of a better term, as it relates to what makes sense.
I think we should add maybe a District 4 over there, so keep basically keep our minimum flexible. And once we get into discussions with people, I'm sure we're gonna have people pushing and pulling each way. We can shift it back and forth and still keep that minimum. If we're at a minimum now and we have people around Moulton that don't want this, or up off of Elm that aren't too thrilled with this, we need to have a little flexibility, and I think this will give us some flexibility. And I think it's a rational, choice of what we're doing there.
I just had this thought I'm just talking out loud, so if it doesn't make sense. How about the idea of like distance from like the commuter rail to a certain distance and then Main Street here? Because District 1, District 2 will both fall in the middle of both the bus line and District 3. Sorry, this new district, District 4, where there's a certain distance that it goes from the bus station and then the commuter rail. So it's more cut and dry. I don't know.
Well, there's bus stops along the way though, so at every bus stop, are you drawing a distance or? Are you doing an offset from the route?
More the route, I'm thinking.
The previous route or the current route?
I don't know. It was just an idea.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in Wakefield Center, we basically only have one stop. There's
Just the one in front of farmland?
Yeah, the next one down is at Jiffy Lube, and then you gotta go up to the corner of Salem Street, which is basically it's a one-way, you know, that's a one-way bus stop. It only takes you one direction. At least the one at Farmland, you can go inbound and outbound. So, I mean, that would be make the most sense for actual commuting. And I hope they keep it. And I know there was some talk about this vision of moving that bus stop, which just drives me crazy that we really wouldn't have a bus stop in our downtown, which is just kind of strange to me.
The other thing that, you know, as I'm looking at the map and trying to think about proximity to different elements that I wanted to kind of throw out there and see if other people had a thought on is, you know, we have that potential future bike path rail trail that's coming in, you know, and we've got this kind of section of lots, you know, that are basically directly across from where Greenwood is, you know, behind that large development that already exists. You know, I think that occurs like right about here. You know, is somewhere in there something that people would be interested in, or do you think that's, you know, too far away from, you know, the other elements in town? But, you know, if I'm looking at it, you're not that far away from the farmland bus stop. You're still within a half mile to the Wakefield Junction spot. It's kind of tucked behind here, but having a little bit of density right by that rail trail and that good proximity to the Galvin might be something that we can think about.
No, I think that would be good because it's sort of central to the Water Street, let's say mini corridor there. There's restaurants, there's Shaw's, so that is a draw right in there. The Molly's building, when that gets redone, is actually going to be a restaurant or a draw there. So I think that's right in the center of the action that you develop. So I think that is a good area to potentially develop. It is right on the edge of the district, but it, again, justifying it with the distance to the bus stop and distance to downtown amenities, I think it makes sense.
And then the other thing that I wanted to kind of put on people's radar, just so we can try to give Aaron and Ezra a little bit better guidance. So if I'm looking at the District 3, for example, right? So we've got, you know, in my mind, if I'm going to highlight one section, in my mind, so if you look at like this block of lots right here, in my mind, it's kind of an all or nothing, right? I think that we should take either all those lots within that square or none of them. So because I think that, you know, having it be rational with the streets makes a lot of sense. So I don't know if other people disagree or agree. You know, I'm looking at, you know, for example, I don't know if it makes a ton of sense to have like all of these lots included. You know, I'd almost rather just go to the center line of the street if we're drawing a new boundary, just because I know, and Matt probably has more experience with this than I do, but having lots in multiple sections, or, you know, lots may change over time. It feels like a recipe for, you know, it to be more difficult to adjudicate at a later date.
On that.
Yeah, and I think also something to note as you go further up, me and as we're talking about this, go further up Chestnut. or go up Fairmount Ave or, you know, over here towards Molten, the lot sizes start to get a little bigger too. So it pulls away from the density. So just keep that in mind too.
Although they're less usable because of the slope of the lots.
Does that factor in though?
It just depends on the map.
Yeah.
But from what I see on the map that the state gave us of included land, it doesn't look like that. They would still just count whatever the lot size is.
I also don't know if I necessarily would pick that, you know, this hill as a priority in terms of where we'd want to site additional multifamily housing, just because those lots are a little less usable from a practical perspective. And you know, living up on the hill, it's not as accessible to some of the other amenities as some of the ones on the lower end, you know, that we're talking about on the eastern side of Main Street. You know, and if you continue to drive, you know, it becomes exceptionally residential the farther west you go. So it's not like you're picking up more amenities as you go east, you know, the Shaws, farmland, etc.
Well, I mean, that Elm parcels are way closer to the train station than the further distance at around Moulton Park. And those lots are relatively level, so I don't think it would be hard to add a unit to them. But you guys experience and planning on knowing what it means to have lot lines and zoning lines not matching, I don't know. I don't have experience of thinking of zoning by Center Street, that's all.
Oh, sorry. I think if you're talking about the Elm Street ones, I think you're 100% right. I'm more talking about the ones up on like off of Prospect onto Fairmount.
Oh, way up there, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, kind of in this area.
Yeah,
doesn't
those.
feel-
I mean, I see people walking to the train from there, but I mean, everywhere within this half circle, I see folks meeting me at the trains.
What Ezra I could do is put different models together. So we could keep this map we have right now. Or Cedar Street, we cut in the middle and everything closest to the commuter rail, we include all those lots. I just say that because that's more of a straight line street compared to where you wrap around Walnut and Gould there. And then you have the park right in the middle too, which kind of cuts everything up. I don't know how the group would feel about that. So we keep what we currently have. Maybe just go inward to Cedar and then see what those other numbers bring us over on the other districts.
I'd advocate you go down Cedar and then you hit Walnut, and then maybe you cut back and you just continue back with Cedar again. You know what I mean? So
No, can you draw it out for me?
yeah, something kind of like
Cedar to Walnut.
sorry.
So down Gould, back onto Cedar.
I don't know if other people disagree, but that kind of, to me, that feels like a pretty good spot to be.
I think that looks good, but I think it's like adding a blatant mistake, so someone will find it and then say, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that." I think for now, I think our ultimate plan should be something like this, but I think we should leave the map as it is, knowing that eventually these are probably going to be taken out. But I think it's a good conversation point, and it'd be interesting as we present this, how other people feel about it too. I think most people are gonna, ultimately agree that that the way Jim drew it out there makes more sense, but I think we should leave it in for now with the goal or the intention that at some point we probably do.
So because I feel like someone will probably ask this question, I like what you just, Jim, but why wouldn't you just continue a straight line rather than, someone will say, well, why did you rope in my, only this area and then cut back in? Are you excluding something or including something because you're trying to, do something or get around something? Or
I think it's just a good block of, if you look at a flat spot with a bunch of lots that seem like they're conducive to multifamily, that block feels like a pretty good spot to site multifamily. I mean, you know, theoretically, if we wanted to continue to drive up Cedar, but that still is where it's relatively flat and it's relatively developable for quality multifamily housing that's got good access, in my opinion. But yeah, you're 100% right,
Yeah,
Greg. Something
yeah.
we'd have to think about.
Yeah, not saying I disagree, just messaging wise when we get there.
100%.
I think one thing we may want to do is schedule one of our meetings to basically walk the district and actually just see if it makes sense. You know, we can look at this on maps, street view, topo, all kinds of things, but until we actually walk down the street and see if we can actually physically walk down there, some of the areas that I looked at in Greenwood, which I thought would potentially be good. I know there's no sidewalks, so you don't want to be walking back and forth. But I think if we get out, once we get a map and we have a meeting where we just literally walk this and discuss things, I think that would definitely be helpful too, especially when it comes to when people have specific questions about why'd you include this or why not. We can say, well, we viewed it and we feel that this would be a good fit, or it wouldn't be.
Yeah, I think that's a strong suggestion. So I just want to take a step back. If we're just looking at compliance for now, right? I'm just going to take what I just put on and delete it. So I think what I'm hearing the group have a soft consensus around is that we want to keep the map materially similar to what we have. Look at potentially having a District 4 and a District 5, for lack of a better term, around these two areas. And then, is there anything else that people feel strongly about in terms of Districts 1, 2, and 3 that we should be changing at this time? And or is there any other spot on the map that people feel as if we should be talking about in terms of additive to this? I mean, I know that we're kind of at this point we've added, the only other real section that hasn't been added would be down here. But is there anything else that anyone else wants to bring up as a spot that they really want to talk about before we move off of the compliance zone, for lack of a better term?
Can I just ask one question? So like what you just drew, I get it. But doesn't that leave like one side of the street as zoned this way and the other side doesn't? Like, is there any advantage having both sides of the street have similar zoning? And I defer to you guys who deal with this all the time, but I just wonder about that.
I think
Well-
yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Well, I think when we get into the parking issues, it's going to be real. That, oh, all those people on that side of the street are parking in front of my house.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be good to include both sides of the street so it can be dealt with holistically instead of, you guys can't park here because you're in a different zone or something.
It just feels like it kind of throws things out of balance if one side of the street kind of has eventually, and this will be years, right? But eventually has more multifamily and one side is more of a residential. Feels out of balance to me.
I agree too. So where we're talking that straight line through there, I would almost move that straight line to the back of the lots. Split that block in half. And so have on one street, each side of the street be in the zone. And the zone line would be along their back line.
So conceptually, you'd almost do the same thing that we were talking about in terms of trying to exclude the commercial spots by taking an offset from the street and then saying that you have to be fully within the district in order to, but you would do something where you'd have it offset the street by enough that it would, maybe bisect this line. If you give me a second to zoom in here, we'd offset by whatever it would be in order to make sure that you capture the full extent of all these. And then because these lots are partially in and partially out, you exclude them. Something to that effect. So the way you draw the district is you actually have it be an offset from the street by some distance. Right?
Yeah, except we see the issues when a zone is, when a lot's partly in. People may, try to get it rezoned either way, so.
That's why I think that for this one, it's useful if we specifically exclude it unless you're 100% in, because it's an overlay. It's not the base zoning, where the base zoning, right? You're either in or you
Yeah.
have to have something else. You're kind of in or you're out, I think is the way we should probably draw or write this language, unless others disagree.
So in this scenario, if you were to push that line north, you would capture potentially those two lots on the other, the north of there, but the rest of them you wouldn't. So those two bigger lots, yeah, you'd get two there and those other three would be. Yeah, that's a good way to go about it. But when you put this in a model, does that pick up that you're picking up two lots and three of the lots are too large to fit in it, and is that gonna mess with the analysis?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, but if for this, you just basically are picking lot by lot. So you're saying
It's
like,
lot, yeah, lot by lot.
so you're just saying like, so Matt, for example, we have to make a judgment call. Say if you offset this 100 feet or 200 feet or 300 feet, like this lot's going to be in or going to be out, and then you just literally almost click on it in the model and it flips to included or excluded.
Okay.
So I think so just want to give people one more opportunity. Is there any other spot on the map that people want to talk about, or any other topics as it relates to this conformance model that people want to get into?
I don't have any comments, but I think to your point earlier, Jim. Or I think it was Jim, that area down, I guess it would be, well, basically below District 3. Will likely, if it doesn't end up being included, likely to have a good talking point as to why we didn't. I know we started talking about the lots on Foundry itself being quite large and staying away from commercial areas, but everything else in that area, I think about what our
You're talking about
rationale
like,
is.
if you're talking about like this,
Yeah.
this area,
Yeah,
right
I
here.
mean, yeah, I mean, to me, it's seemingly pretty easy. It's some of the farthest from transportation. But just as we get closer, or if we actually do start socializing this, sort of understanding that likely would be a question, one of the first questions, because it's pretty obvious, with everything else concentrated up north there, that this is sort of empty.
I think some of that area too might be excluded, Greg, due to the Crystal Lake
Okay.
watershed. I looked into that area too prior. I don't think all of it, but I think a good chunk of it. My computer's really slow. I'm trying to pull up that map now, but that could be some justification that you couldn't even include it.
Okay, so and Aaron, do you think that you have enough to feedback from the group to go back and make some edits to the map with Ezra, so that next time we present, we have kind of a version 2, for lack of a better term? Aaron, you're on mute.
Yes, I think I do. I guess my only clarifying question is when we go to select these parcels, I know we were just talking about kind of that 100 feet, but over in this district, new District 4 and District 5, where do I want to kind of, am I going to the complete edge of that half mile when I'm looking at parcels?
If I'm being honest, and you can tell, other PIP members of the group can tell me if you think that I'm out of bounds, but in my mind, if I'm looking at this district around, on the backside of Crescent, I think that you're going to, what's this street? Even though some of it's technically outside of the district, but
Pleasant Street, is that Pleasant?
Yeah, so Pleasant
Yeah.
to Salem down to Water Street, that area there.
Pleasant to Salem to Water. Okay.
yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that because I don't think we decided on that. Yeah, that's plenty for, into Maine. Okay.
And then I think if you're looking at that kind of this district down here, I think you're really looking at, what is that? Is that Wakefield Ave?
Okay.
That little pocket right there.
I mean, we could just include that whole as a one area, the one district.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Yeah, I have plenty to work on. But we're good with District 1, District 2, the lots that we're seeing here, keeping the commercial open as well as Main Street as well. Is there anything that you think is missing? I need to go through and just make sure it's as accurate as possible, but
I think to Matt's earlier point, I think once we start socializing this, I think there's a couple things that I'm seeing that, for example, I could foresee in the future, these lots being sacrificed. But at the same time, I don't, unless others disagree, I don't think that we necessarily need to make that move right now.
okay. All right, sounds good. And Jim, looking at the agenda, I don't know if there's more people want to talk about. I know that's kind of all we had on for today, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I did want to take a step back. So, this map discussion, thank you all for I think engaging and being thoughtful and really thinking about what we can do to be proactive in terms of, for next steps. So we've got a couple different things that we got to do, right? So I think we have an option for a site plan review. We have an option to set some design standards. We have a series of elements that we have to make a decision. Erin, in the presentation she had, she made a series of assumptions as it relates to what we want to do, mostly on the basis of what we had for the mixed use overlay district. Open space requirement, maximum lot coverage, parking ratios. Do folks feel as if we want to go through some of those baseline assumptions and validate those, or do we feel as a body that what we have for the mixed use overlay makes sense for the town and can be, for lack of a better term, copy and pasted for this conversation?
Well, one of my questions is about parking. I know you said it at 1.5. If this changed to say 2 per unit, does that change the density, or what happens with that? Because truthfully, 1.5 spaces is, as we know, is just not enough, unfortunately. I don't know if we can bump that up some, 1.75 or something like that, but I know we're gonna have complaints about people parking on streets, overcrowded. I think we need to make sure that these units are designed for the type of people that are gonna be living around here, which are sort of foreseeable future. They're gonna have cars, they're gonna have kids, and they're gonna have cars.
I guess I have a baseline question on that, because I don't have a view either way, but it's the MBTA Communities Act. Do we want to be signaling? I don't know. I don't even know what, I guess my question is, but it's not what we're trying to do is comply with, with one, affordable housing for a law that is supposed to be for MBTA, commuter communities, essentially. Yeah, I mean, I think we need to think a little bit more about it rather than we just think we need more per unit, because it is an MBTA Communities Act. It's not I don't know. I can't intelligently put forward what I'm trying to.
No, I mean, the whole goal is, to be building housing around a transit station in hopes that people take more,
Yeah, I completely agree. I definitely want to think this through.
Mhm.
I don't want to kind of just have a knee jerk that we need more parking. Because I think we can make ways for people to have less parking. The problem we have in Wakefield is that we allow street parking. So you're right, Matt, it means everybody complains.
Yeah, and in all honesty, I think we hear quite a bit, people say, well, parking's bad, but have we seen actual, not parking's bad, but, have we seen actual data? We've only had one project actually come back to us. In my, I don't know, 5 years on the zoning board, who actually needed to change and needed more parking and was full. And that was up next to Tarrant Lane there. I forget that gazebo circle there.
Vista, Wakefield Vista.
Yeah,
that one?
Wakefield Vista.
Vista, what do I call it? Vista.
Whereas, yes, we hear quite a bit saying, oh, this isn't going to be enough. Is it going to be enough? And seemingly, without having actual data in front of us, but actual, coming back with hard data for complaints, we haven't seen it be a real problem. Now, could it be a problem because people just, park on the streets when they go, or park in different areas when they go downtown? Yeah, but I think that's different than number of units per dwelling unit or per bedroom. Or number of spaces per dwelling unit or per bedroom.
So just to facilitate the conversation, I pulled up, this is what we have currently in our zoning for I believe our mixed use overlay district just references the baseline zoning for parking. So right now, 1 and 2 family houses is 2 units per dwelling unit. For housing for elderly, it's a half a unit per, or half a car park spacing per unit dwelling. And then multifamily dwellings, which is where we would be living in this envision, it's 1.5 per unit for 2 beds, and then 2 for 3 beds or more.
Well, it's like Julie said, the big issue here is that Wakefield allows street parking. And because they allow that, that means people feel, entitled to have as many cars as, they can fit on the street. If we didn't have street parking, this would be a lot easier discussion because it would force people to live within their means. I grew up in Arlington. There's no street parking there. The town developed with originally a train, and then it's got a good bus system. It's growing still. People find people need to get into Boston. I know it's a little bit closer, but they get in there. So we kind of really need to revisit this whole on-street parking, but that's
I
outside
couldn't
of
agree
what
with you
we're
more.
doing. It's one of those things that
It's a little bit of a third rail, but I completely agree with you.
yeah, I mean, it's out there. It's hard to take back, but
Well, we only gave it back a couple of years ago because there was never street parking in the winter, and that was a deterrent.
and yeah, and it did its intended purpose of controlling. I see a lot of my neighbors that have, they've got 3 kids, they've got 3 extra cars. Do they need 3 extra cars? No, but everyone has a car, so.
Yeah, and we have to think about it. I mean, Aaron and I are working on a project to try to do some micro transit in town, so there might be other solutions as well. Probably not in the time frame we need, but
Longer term. Just so everyone knows too, just to give you an idea, so I was playing with the compliance model and I changed the parking to 1.5 to 1.75. And it only brings us down. So with 1.5 parking spaces, it's 1,758 units for those 3 districts. With 1.75 parking spaces, it's 1,702. And so it goes down the number of units that we get by including, adding more parking for each unit, but it doesn't go down significantly. Now, if I went the other way, I'm not sure, I haven't plugged in 1 yet or 1.25, what that would look like, but just to give you guys an idea.
I think it's something that we're gonna we need to address here because it's gonna be an issue when this gets rolled out is parking. And we need to have the answers before they're asked.
So I guess this goes back to, I think what I mentioned at the beginning, at the first meeting, and I think was sort of all of the projects right now happening together. If this is we're talking about this as a townwide problem in the zoning bylaw, or really the bylaw review committee right now is going through the zoning bylaws. Do we want to have someone suggest that they take a look at it and fix it, rather than have a set parking for what seemingly would be the rest of the town, and then just what should be a transit oriented zoning overlay require more parking? That seems to
think
me doing
That's
it
more
that way
holistic,
seems-
Greg. I like that because then it's,
Yeah. It just seems to me to be counterintuitive to
townwide,
what we're
yeah.
trying to do, to say, hey, this transit oriented overlay, you need two, but we
Yeah.
also just redo the zoning bylaw, and they could have done it there and they didn't. The town trying to go, the whole town as a whole, maybe, I don't know what they're doing, but maybe they go another way, maybe they go less, maybe they keep it the same, I have no idea. But then we do something completely different, and then also that just adds complexity that doesn't need to be there.
From the sounds of it, it doesn't sound like, I think it's just something for us to think about, and I can play around with the model too and show you the unit count differences, but I can also reach out to and kind of see when, I think that's a good point, Greg, what you were mentioning with the bylaw, because what if we did do like 1.75 and then for some reason the bylaw review committee, lowers it? Yeah, it just wouldn't be a good look, I think, for the group. Is that what you're insinuating?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's total
No, I
conjecture
think
on
it's
my
a
part. I have no
valid
idea.
point. No, I think
Right.
it's a valid point.
Honestly, that's one of the reasons why, from I was thinking about the MBTA overlay from a let's get this passed perspective. If there's value in just letting the parking reference the baseline, what we already have in the zoning code, and not making any real changes, it's kind of similar to what they did with the mixed use overlay. So you end up with the 1.5 for 2-bed or fewer and 2 for 3 beds. And if that makes it so, if we make any changes at a future date with to your point, Greg, and the recodification, then if this is just providing an as of right mechanism that is consistent with the balance of the town. I don't know if that makes sense from people are always, to Matt's point, people are always going to be asking about parking, but if these are all units that are essentially the exact same as the balance of the development in town, I think that may be a method of convincing people that this impact isn't going to be as much as they might fear. But I
So
definitely don't.
if it were to change later, could this change too, or is this like fixed because it's a compliance issue?
That's what I was just going to say. I think we may need to say what we're going to do when we comply with the state.
But I think that if you loosened up parking requirements, you'd have to submit it to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General would go and validate that you're not going from compliance to non-compliance. But if anything, making it so the parking is less restrictive is going to make it so you're in more compliance, for lack of a better term, correct?
Yeah.
So I guess we could think about what we think is a baseline. I mean, I wonder if we would be able to get away with this, but say, in compliance with, not in compliance, but you have to meet the town zoning bylaw unless it falls below X, and then you could stay at X or something like that. I don't know if that's I just said complex, trying to not introduce complexity, and now I'm introducing complexity. But,
Either that or what you could do is you could just set it at 1.5. You could set it at 1.5 because that's materially consistent with what we have in the balance of town for simplicity.
But either way, we probably need to understand what the thinking is. I think that the zoning or the bylaw review committee is on like a 2-year process. Is that right? So they may
Spring
not.
of 25.
It's that far. Okay.
I had a conversation with Dan Lieber yesterday as it related to what their process is.
Okay, so maybe it's worth a question, and then if they don't have an idea, then yeah, we do what we have to do.
Okay,
I would love to see either we have to do it or the overall base has it, but that. Talk about EV charging stations, especially in multifamily, having that be available so renters can come and. Not lose the opportunity to have a electric vehicle in the future. But I know that there's folks in town may be pursuing that separately. Is that a good way to put it, Julie?
Yep.
But if we want to beat it to the punch and slip it in, that'd be fine too.
Yep.
So, and people can tell me if you disagree. I think what I'm hearing is that people want to ruminate on parking a little bit more. Maybe we circle back and to have this conversation again at the next meeting as people think about it in terms of what people's positions are, and maybe we circle back and kind of think about it again and revisit the subject. Doesn't sound like we have like a strong consensus at this time. Unless other people disagree, does it make sense for us to move on to a different topic, or do people want to keep talking about parking at this time?
Well, I guess as a task item, can we get clarification on, could we just reference the base or do we have to list a number? That would be good to know.
My understanding is that we do have the ability to reference the base.
Okay.
They being DC,
DHCD, I'll need a number.
yeah. You'll need a number, but if you have it reference the base, then I think what Ezra was saying is that you'd probably make like a reasonable estimate in terms of you've got 1.5, you've got 2 in terms of those two things. They may plug it in at like 1.75 for their compliance model perspective.
Okay.
Okay, the next couple things I wanted to make sure we hit as a group, again, we don't have to make decisions right now, but I do want to kind of facilitate a conversation. Are there other elements that we are thinking about that would make sense to include in this multifamily overlay district in terms of bonuses for mixed use, whether it be density or whatnot, and or is that something that people are interested in, or is that something that we, since we're excluding our commercial corridors, that we think that we can get away from because we've kind of addressed that baseline concern?
I think at this point, stay away from bonuses, just stick with. It's gonna add another level of complexity when going to sell this to townsfolk. That, oh, if you did this, then you could have a 4-story building next to you, and I think that's only gonna put more fear into people, and so I think as complex as this is, let's keep it as simple as possible and not add that in. That would be my thoughts.
I agree. I think we still have that mixed use overlay district where they're allowed to go for higher density, and we can push for more mixed use through the special permit process. And a lot of the neighborhoods we're calling out are, in fact, residential neighborhoods without current commercial.
Are we allowed to require any, I just can't remember the answer, any affordability component to these? Or is it none at all? Or is it 10? Was there talk about 10% or something? I don't know.
It's 10% max unless you can do some sort of like study to indicate that
Oh,
it's
yeah,
financially
okay.
feasible.
Yeah.
So I think from my understanding, reading some of the supplemental documentation, is that unless you have units that are up to like a minimum threshold of like about 10 units, it's not really viable, because if you require 1 unit to be affordable on a 3 unit, it's 33%. And I don't think that's going to pass muster with the state. And I don't know if we're necessarily thinking that we want to facilitate a 10 unit as of right within town.
But we can have the 10%. I was just thinking if we couldn't have any affordability component, then maybe there was some sort of bonus for that, but at least having the 10% to keep us at the very least consistent with 40B, I don't know, inching towards that.
So to be clear, I think that if the way that the path we're going down, where we're talking about allowing 3 units as of right
Oh, yeah.
I
Okay.
don't think you're allowed to have an
Yeah.
affordability component because we don't have enough.
Yeah.
It's that you would be able, and Aaron, you can tell me if I'm completely stepping in it, but I believe my understanding is that if we go down the path we're going down, we're not going to be able to include the affordability component because we don't have the size.
Yeah, I think it was more those larger density projects that they
Yeah.
were looking at for that for affordability component. And I was on a call the other day with Mass Housing Partnership, and they kind of reiterated that they like what we're doing, but unit counts that small or number of units that small. I don't think the state would be too keen on that, unfortunately.
And I could see if there was a lot big enough
Hmm.
that people would subdivide it in order just to get away from having to
Mhm.
do affordability, you know, they'll
Mhm.
do whatever they can to get away from it, so. I think unfortunately, that's it's out of our control, people aren't gonna like it, just like you can't have forced, senior housing or something. I think a lot of people are gonna complain about it, but our hands are tied, so.
So, and then so I think what I'm hearing is we think that bonuses are overly complicated. We don't want to go down that road. We just talked about the affordability component. I think sounds like we're all in consensus as it relates to those elements. The other thing I want to just kind of talk about and have a soft introduction is site plan review. So for this set of projects, we do have the ability for site plan review to review things such as architecture, screening, some of vehicular access, etc. It's still as of right, so you couldn't reject the project on the fact that it's a 3-unit building, for example. But my baseline assumption has always been that we are interested in a site plan review, but I do want to just have that conversation right now with this group. Is that something that we're interested in? And if it is something we're interested in, are there specific elements that we wanted to note that have to be, the boxes have to be checked, for lack of a better term, in order for them to, obtain site plan review and then, go and get their building permit?
I think having site plan review is gonna be good because there's gonna be a lot of fear. That, oh, people can do whatever they want. Having some guidelines. Again, is gonna go well to the selling point of this, is that, yes, it's gonna be reviewed somewhat, so people aren't able to do whatever, they're not able to put up basically, let's say, metal storage units and call it a building. So something like that.
Is there any reason for it to be any different in terms of checklist than what you do now? I don't know your checklist currently for other developments. Does it have to be unique, or would it apply?
The fact that it's by right.
No, but the things that you guys look at when you do site plan review.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would have to think about it because there's a lot there that'll be in general a lot smaller than, just as a for instance, that things of this size, if they were a project of this size, if it would require site plan review, a lot of times we'll attempt to come in front of us and waive site plan review. We've said no a few times to that, but I don't know. I think it's a lot deeper question than just a. Yeah.
I think it's something.
And
for the
honestly,
group.
Greg, we don't have to make a decision on this right now. That may be, maybe the ask coming out of this meeting is for you to have that conversation at a future ZBA meeting. Because, and then again, I'm making an assumption, taking a step back. I'm assuming that if we did have a site plan review, we would continue to have it be routed through the ZBA, consistent with how we run other site plan reviews for the town, and not have it go through the planning board. That's an assumption I'm making, but if other people disagree or think that there's other ways to manage it, but if we did, then I would think that we should have Greg reach out, at the next ZBA meeting and have that conversation of what the ZBA's position would be on that matter.
Well, I guess that's a question too, and I guess I'd be interested in your take, Matt and Jim, where this is supposed to be a just to increase housing in general, and it is by right. And now I don't know if it's always like this, but in Wakefield, seemingly our meetings are consistently 5-6 hours long. So smaller projects sort of get screwed in having to go through multiple hearings, whereas, another board, I know sometimes you guys have really long meetings, but a lot of times it's quicker. Does it make sense for one to have it in front of, I guess one thing you would have to think about is an elected versus an appointed board. But also would having it in front of planning board offer a better path to, or a more efficient path? I don't know, that's.
I can see it going mostly through planning board, because I think we're gonna be talking a lot more about site issues than actual design issues and types of materials, things like that. So, and I think it's something that it could almost be a formality, 1 or 2 meetings and you're done. I don't think it would, no public hearing, it doesn't need to be posted. No posted public hearing. It would be on our agenda that's coming up. I don't think this should be burdened on the ZBA. They're not asking for relief on anything unless for some reason they are. And then as it is, right now people have the option to have site plan review between the planning board and the ZBA. Most projects need relief, so they go before the ZBA. So if they chose to, they didn't need relief, they could come to the planning board. I think, again, it'd be equitable. I don't think the ZBA needs more work. So
and for reference, other communities typically site plan, from what I've seen working in development, a lot of times site plan is more the purview of the planning board than the ZBA. So
yeah,
it's not like that would be an inconsistent methodology as well.
because I would think some of the issues are going to be, parking, drainage, screening, things like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that the planning board could readily handle with some standards and a little bit of oversight. So.
Yeah. So until they need relief, they could stay in front of the planning board.
I think that's a good
I think
idea.
that makes sense.
Yeah, so Matt, maybe I revised what I just said. Maybe the to do is not for Greg, but for the two of us to have that conversation with the balance of the planning board, and talk about what we would be interested in as a body to have included or not included as it relates to, because being at by right for the site plan, I think you have to define a little bit more of the it's a little less discretionary, for lack of a better term. You know what I mean? You have to define, if you check these boxes, then there's no gating mechanism that we can stop you, quote unquote.
Yeah, there need to be some design standards, basically this is what we expect to see. You bring it to us, okay, you meet everything, make sure it gets built that way and go forward.
Yep. Okay. So Matt and I will take that as a to-do for us in terms of envisioning that. In terms of kind of the other components for between now and where we get to the end in terms of this process. So I think the open items, as I understand it, and again, anyone can feel free if I have this wrong. Aaron's going to go back with Ezra, work on kind of revising our compliance district around Wakefield Junction. At some point, we as a board need, and honestly, I think that kind of the next meeting might be a good opportunity for this, to talk about what we think in terms of other, non-compliance zones. Matt and I will talk to the planning board about site plan review and what that is, and then probably makes sense based on what Matt was saying. The suggestion, which I think is a good one, is once we have to baseline some of these districts, maybe scheduling something where we can go all walk it together to make sure that we're all in agreement that we have the right ones. What I've done right now is I pulled up the kind of our proposed schedule, which again, completely subject to revision. If anyone thinks that we're completely off base, feel free to let me know. But right now, so right here, May 16th, we're we did the first pass of the boundaries, we provided feedback. I think that's all been, we're basically right where we want to be. Between now and our next meeting, Aaron's going to work with Ezra to revise the district boundaries based on the feedback. We had, talked about at the next one, we'll do the exercise again and provide additional feedback for the compliance map for DC, GHCD. I think we're in pretty good shape actually for that. Then the question ends up being at our next meeting, we've got parking is an outstanding issue, site plan review is an outstanding issue, and any of these other discretionary additional zones that would not be required for the compliance. What do people feel and then we also have to actually collate the bylaw as well. So just from a process perspective, does it make sense at the next meeting if we all kind of do a little bit of homework and we kind of figure out where would be the other districts that we want to talk about? We go through the district for compliance. We go through other districts that we're potentially going to be identifying as, things that we want to do that aren't required for state governance, for state compliance, Greenwood, Salem, etc. And then after that June 6th meeting, maybe we set a time to go walk whatever areas we want to go and do. And maybe it's not, when this formalized time frame, because I can't imagine we going walking at 7 o'clock at night. That doesn't feel like the right solution. So I didn't want to get feedback from people, in terms of where we're trending, because I think after the next meeting, the intent would be to start trying to come up with the actual draft zoning language with working with staff, and then between now and August, so June, August, we actually create the initial bylaw. But I wanted to run that kind of holistically by folks and see what people thought, if that makes sense, if there's concerns, etc.
Generally looks fine to me. Yeah, I agree. A walking tour after work may not be the best time, so maybe we could do a Saturday or something.
Yeah, the timeline looks good to me also.
Sorry,
Are
Jim,
we-
did I miss it? Are we gonna have any kind of you might have said it, sorry, middle, public meeting, just letting people know where we're at?
So I think the intent is to have this group finish its work. And
Okay,
then we're going to have the public I imagine we're going to have a number of public meetings from when we finish the kind of the initial proposal, and then between then and Springtown meeting.
okay.
So, Jim, so you were thinking any tweaking of this or potentially major changes from public input could come after the working group has disbanded?
I think that's the only way we're really going to do it, unless we keep the working group running through the balance of, between now and spring of 24. My thought was that once the working group concludes its work, and honestly, this is all just my initial thought. I'm by no means is this what I'm saying absolutely has to go if people strongly disagree. But my thought is that working group concludes its work and basically refers it to the planning board, and then the planning board picks it up. And then Matt, you and I would bring our compatriots up to speed, and then we would start that public engagement process, and then feed any revisions that need to be made as part of, kind of that post-working group era, for lack of a better term.
Well, truthfully, when we go to sell this, I'd like to have as many salespeople on board as possible. So I think maybe keeping the working group together, whether they meet like every other month or, just occasionally, I think a lot of people here are going to put a lot of work into it. They'll want to have, a little teeth in the game going forward. So I would hesitate on disbanding the group and maybe keeping it going until basically almost until the end, just so there's some consistency and some extra cheerleaders on board that are part of it. I'd hate for it to go to the planning board and it's changed completely, and then the people that are here feel, like they were, they're their contributions were cut out. So,
Honestly, if that's the way the other members of the working group feel, I have no horse in that race. Honestly, we've been myself and other members of the planning board have been really trying to figure out what we want to do after we get past the initial development of this and how we communicate it to the town, solicit feedback. So I have no real horse in that race, and honestly, I'm still trying to figure out what makes sense in terms of presentations to whom and what time frame. So if other people feel a want and a need to continue to stay engaged via keeping the working group active, I think that makes a lot of sense if other folks have an interest in doing so.
I'm happy to stay engaged, but not going to be offended with whatever you think will work for this process.
Well said, Greg.
Second that.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably where it ends up going is that after August 1st, we probably have a series. And honestly, maybe this is something that we as a group can think about separately, and maybe we have a conversation about what we do after, August 1st. I keep throwing August 1st because that's when we initially talked about it. But if it's not August 1st and it's something other date, that's totally fine too. But after we get to the point where we have our initial proposal, that communication process is something that we probably do need to sit down and think about as a group. And if other people have thoughts, more than happy to have that conversation. I think that honestly, we spent a lot of work just trying to get the working group convened. So I'm just glad that we got to this point. So now I haven't quite gotten my head around what the post working group world looks like yet. So
Well, just to give a few ideas, I think we have outreach needs to come in lots of different forms of media, and you kind of have to go to them. So, presence at any townwide event. I don't know if the town's doing a town day again, but having a table at that, if there's a, Italian fest, you have a table there, you just need to be visible, in all ways, so people can't claim that they didn't have a chance to speak up. But they will anyways, but we have to do our best to reach out to them, maybe go to the senior center and talk to them, and library and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, we'll use WCAT, there'll be lots of ways.
Yeah, we can connect with Jen on all the best practices on getting the word out.
So, okay. So in that case, what we'll do is the next meeting, what we'll do is we'll plan on reviewing we'll probably pick up the working group, or sorry, the multifamily district to comply with the state, see if we can get that nailed down as good as we can. We'll talk about those other districts that we are potentially looking at. And then maybe at that time, we can kind of sit down and think about, locking some of those districts, and in order to facilitate us kind of getting to the end on that. And then we can kind of define what the balance of the process looks like after that. Does that seem like it works for folks?
Yep.
So in that case, I think that's everything I had on the agenda. So I'll just let anyone who wants to, I'll just go around the table or the Zoom call and let anyone, if they have any other things they want to bring up at this time. So I'll start. Matt, is there anything else that you wanted to bring up before we conclude for tonight?
which Matt? You Matt or the other Matt?
Matt Bowen.
I'll go with Matt Lowry since you spoke first.
Okay. I am going to say that when I heard that this was going to go on Zoom, I was kind of disappointed because I enjoy the collaboration of the in-person meetings, but I think we have a good group here, and everyone got a chance to talk. So I think it worked out well. I'm not a fan of just all Zoom meetings, and I'm really disappointed that the town does not have some space set up for hybrid meetings, because again, I was the advocate for getting this out there. But I really think these in-person meetings should happen soon, and I hope the town comes along soon and gets a space for it.
I'll go next. I couldn't agree with you more. Matt, we need to be doing this. And I will take that back as well to the town council. We've set money aside. I'm not quite sure what the holdup is. So, but no, I'm happy. It's nice to meet you, Matt Bowen. And I look forward to continuing this all the way to the end.
Thank you for that. I'll go with Matt Bowen this time.
Yeah, thank you. So this is sort of my first foray into, municipal governance. So I apologize I didn't have more to say. I figured it was my place, given this is my first go around with it, to do a lot more listening than I did speaking, but it's incredibly informative and I'm doing my best to take it all in so that I have more to contribute as this process continues on.
No worries. And honestly, it's there's a lot there. So we all understand. I think that we all have been trying to catch up. It took us a couple of meetings to really, I think that this is the first meeting we were really cooking with gas in terms of direction. So, and then Robin.
Echo the in-person. I don't know why my camera decided to stop working in the middle of this meeting, so I apologize for that. That's the first, but I like the direction we're going. Thanks.
Thank you. Greg.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. And then last but not least, Aaron, is there anything else you want to add before we convene?
Yeah, I just want you guys also to keep in mind when you think the best time for me to kind of set this pre-adoption review application meeting is with DHCD. I think it's important for us to take advantage of it. I received an email last week in regard to it. They need up to 90 days to meet with us. And so,
Hey, Aaron, can you take a step back? That meeting, what is that? I apologize. I'm not sure if I know what you're
sorry,
talking
so
about.
I talked about it.
I have to
earlier.
sign off. I'm just gonna say goodbye.
All right, bye.
Bye.
So they're able to meet with us at the pre-adoption review application. So it's basically they will review what we're putting forward to the state, to them, to make sure that everything is compliant and that everything looks well prior to us going to town meeting. So.
Does it make sense meeting with them before or after we get public feedback? I mean, if we show them what we have in the public and then DHCD says great, and then the feedback is like, whoa, is it a problem? We have to go back to them a second time?
I mean, that's a good point. It's something for everyone to keep on the back of their mind. No, it's a valid point. Just I know it's the spring now, but spring will be upon us, tomorrow. And so just something for us to think about along the way in the process.
Yeah, I think
And while we have Ezra here, I mean, Ezra won't be with us in the fall. So I guess it just depends on where the process goes.
Yeah, it's a great thing to plant a flag on the ground and say we should think about that going forward. I don't know if I necessarily, to Robin's point, I don't necessarily know if I have a strong feeling yet, but that's probably something we should put on the list for next time.
You could ask based on his other communities, when are they approaching them? Is it?
I'm assuming everyone's going to be coming in at the end of next year. I was on a call the other day, like I mentioned, and we're much further ahead than a lot of communities. So everyone's going to be waiting till last minute.
Honestly, it's a testament to the group here and the town leadership in general. I think that we're significantly ahead of a lot of folks, and I think that hopefully we can get to the point where we're not scrambling last minute trying to get compliance before we have funds being removed from the town. So, I think we're in a good spot, and I think that we're a leader from what I understand in some respects.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That's all I have.
Okay. Well, in that case, everyone, thank you so much for the time, and I look forward to talking to you guys in a couple of weeks.
All right.
And take care all.
Thank
Bye.
you.
You guys.